Um, what if the very institution that society tells you is, the key to a happy, fulfilled life is actually a design of the devil, like meant to drag you directly into hell?
It is a pretty wild premise to start with.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are stepping completely outside the conventional cultural script today to explore this highly unconventional, honestly deeply provocative text titled Blessings to the Unmarried.
Yeah, and it was written by an author named Shuai back in June of 2023. So, roughly 3 years ago from where we sit today in 2026.
Exactly. But before we dive into the actual mechanics of this text, we really need to set a firm boundary for you, the listener.
Absolutely. Because this source material, it presents an uncompromising absolute teardown of a foundational societal institution. The author is deeply critical of marriage on every conceivable level.
Yeah, and as your guides on this deep dive, we want to be crystal clear. We are absolutely not endorsing these viewpoints.
Right, nor are we taking a stance against them. Our objective here is strictly analytical. We are just here to impartially explore, the architectural blueprints of Zhuifeng's philosophy.
We're just mapping the terrain of his logic. And that terrain starts with a massive foundational earthquake. Shuifeng doesn't ease the reader into his premise at all.
No, he really doesn't. He just drops it right on you.
He begins by explicitly stating that the institution of marriage is quite literally a design of the devil aimed at dragging people into hell. He writes that even angels, upon entering into a marriage, can turn into demons.
Which is such strong imagery. And he claims that human nature itself becomes fundamentally distorted just by the act of getting married. He doesn't just call it difficult. He calls it the epicenter of human misery.
Right, the root of all life's unhappiness. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the language he uses is just highly absolute.
It is, and he creates this immediate contrast, right? While condemning the institution, he offers this direct, explicit blessing to the unmarried.
Specifically to those who have made a conscious decision to never get married. Like it has to be a choice.
Exactly. He promises them happiness and a bright future of what he calls life. And it is crucial to note that in his text, the word life is fully capitalized.
Yeah, let's actually talk about the mechanics of that, because capitalizing life isn't just, a stylistic quirk. In philosophical texts, that usually signals a shift.
Right, a shift from mere biological survival to some kind of cosmic or a spiritual vitality.
Right, so he's essentially arguing that marriage acts as a literal roadblock to achieving your highest existential potential. It's like finding this massive glitch in the societal matrix.
That's a great way to put it. Most of the world looks at marriage and sees this, this staircase to adulthood.
Yeah, and Zhuifeng looks at that exact same staircase and says, no, you are walking onto a trapdoor.
He views it as a structural barrier. He actually writes that marriage is an obstacle, a resistance to the elevation of human life quality to these heavenly realms.
So in his framework, you literally cannot evolve spiritually while tethered to a legal domestic partnership.
No, you can't. The institution itself is just a cosmic negative to him.
But I want to push back on his premise of angels turning into demons for a second. Like, is he suggesting that the legal document itself contains some kind of corrupting power?
Well, not the paper itself, no.
Or is it the enforced proximity of another human being that causes this alleged distortion of human nature?
It's the enforced proximity combined with the structural expectations of the institution itself. He basically argues that marriage forces humans into this really unnatural framework of ownership.
Oh, wow. Ownership, that's a heavy word.
Yeah, ownership and expectation. You're no longer interacting with another person as a free, independent entity.
Right, you're interacting with them as possession.
Or a dependent.
Exactly. And that structural shift, according to Zhuifeng, is what activates the demonic qualities, the jealousy, the control, the total loss of individual autonomy. Which brings us to the actual day-to-day evidence he provides for this cosmic destruction. And it is a really fascinating pivot.
Oh, it really is. It's jarring.
Because we go from these sweeping statements about heavenly realms and the devil's design right down into the incredibly mundane grit of, like, sharing a bathroom.
Yeah, he outlines the anatomy of marital misery, and honestly, it reads like a laundry list of every terrible roommate experience you could possibly imagine.
The juxtaposition is just striking.
Yeah.
He grounds these massive philosophical claims in highly relatable, very terrestrial grievances.
Yeah.
He literally asks the reader to imagine being married to someone with glaring personal flaws.
Right, like he lists things like a severe lack of hygiene, intense vanity, extreme selfishness.
And a volatile temper. He mentions strong possessiveness. Specifically, a partner not allowing you to interact with the opposite sex.
Yeah, and he really highlights the daily grind of someone constantly nagging in your ear, always finding fault with you day in and day out.
And he presents this incredibly grim ultimatum for you. He says you either endure this nagging and lack of hygiene for a lifetime, or you go through a divorce. And he points out that both options are just painful and tragic.
He is basically establishing a scenario where there is no winning move once you enter the contract. You're just stuck.
But then he scales this up in a way that I find really tough to swallow. He explicitly states that marriage is the incubator of jealousy and strife, and that it is the actual birthplace of familial, racial, and national conflicts.
Yeah, it's a huge leap.
Wait a minute, so the author is drawing a straight line from someone constantly nagging you about dirty dishes all the way to the outbreak of racial and national warfare.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychological theory he is building to justify that. He is actually outlining a mechanism of resource guarding and tribalism.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, when you enter a marriage, you are structurally shrinking your primary allegiance down to a nuclear family unit, right?
Yeah.
Your survival, your genetic legacy, your economic resources.
They're all suddenly tied to this one person.
Exactly. They are legally and emotionally bound to this tiny microunit. It creates this inherent us versus the world dynamic.
Oh, I see. So because my legal and moral obligation is hyper-focused on protecting my specific household, I become inherently more selfish on a macro scale.
Right.
My empathy has a hard boundary line drawn around my property.
Exactly. Zhu argues that this hyper-focus breeds a culture of relentless comparison. You are constantly measuring your unit's resources and status against the unit next door.
Wow, okay. So the jealousy and selfishness incubated within the four walls of a home are the foundational seeds of tribalism then.
Yes, that's his core argument. Instead of a unified global community where resources are shared and humanity is viewed as one big family, marriage just fragments the species.
You end up with millions of tiny walled-off kingdoms fiercely competing with one another.
Exactly. And when you aggregate that localized selfishness over millions of households, it explodes into racial division and national conflicts.
It is an incredibly bold causal link. I mean, taking the friction of sharing domestic space and inflating it into the engine of global warfare.
It's radical, to say the least.
But if we accept his premise for a moment, right? Let's assume this institution is an agonizing incubator for both personal misery and global destruction. The immediate question is, why do billions of people willingly sign up for it? Why walk onto the trap door?
Right, and Shuifeng's answer to that is deeply rooted in his view of human history and this seductive illusion of romantic love.
So he doesn't think people do it on purpose then?
No, he doesn't believe people enter marriage with malicious intent or some desire to suffer. He believes they are just blinded by short-term biological and emotional impulses.
Okay.
He actually refers to human history as a chronicle of ignorance, where people unknowingly sign what he calls a contract of self-sale.
A contract of self-sale. Man, that is a heavy phrase. Here's where it gets really interesting, because he maps out this tragic, almost inevitable narrative arc of a relationship.
Yeah, he walks the reader through the whole timeline.
It starts beautifully. Sweet love enters the halls of marriage, fueled by beautiful wishes and high expectations. Wow. But then he uses this incredibly poetic, kind of melancholy phrase. He says those beautiful wishes gradually settle into the riverbed of years.
The riverbed of years. It's a profound metaphor, really. It implies a slow, inevitable erosion.
Right. It isn't a sudden explosion that destroys the marriage.
No, it is the relentless daily friction of existence wearing away at the initial joy. You know, much like water slowly carving out stone.
And he details that erosion step by step. He writes that the efforts to change the other person's flaws eventually fade away like illusions. You realize the bad hygiene or the volatile temper isn't going anywhere.
At that point, he says hope turns into disappointment. Disappointment ferments into despair.
And ultimately, you enter what he calls the bottomless abyss of reincarnation, filled with endless remorse and regret.
It's a very dark trajectory.
It honestly reminds me of signing up for a lifelong mandatory group project for a class you can never, ever drop. Your final grade is entirely dependent on someone else's unfixable flaws.
I see where you're going with the group project analogy, but I don't think it captures the sheer gravity of what Shuifeng is arguing here.
Really? How so?
Well, a group project implies an external authority grading you, right? And crucially, it implies an eventual end to the semester. Shuifeng views this as an eternal spiritual tether.
Oh, I see. There is no end to the semester, in his view.
This raises an important question about how he views time. Because life is painfully short, he emphasizes how quickly a lifetime flashes. By binding yourself to another person guarantees a permanent loss of freedom.
So the grade isn't a letter on a report card, it is your actual spiritual trajectory.
Precisely. Which brings us to the ultimate currency in this text, which is freedom. He operates on an absolute binary when it comes to freedom.
He really does. There's no nuance or spectrum here at all. He states unequivocally that where there is freedom, there is paradise, and where there is no freedom, there is hell.
To Xu Feng, the concept of a mutually beneficial compromise within a marriage is just a myth. It doesn't exist.
You cannot have an arrangement where both partners maintain their freedom while enhancing each other's lives.
Not in his philosophy. The very act of binding yourself to someone else through expectation and obligation means you are enslaved. It is a 100% loss of freedom.
So in his mind, there is no middle ground where you, like, lovingly and freely agree on how to split the household chores. The agreement itself is the prison.
Exactly.
The fact that you have to consult another human being before making a decision is his definition of hell.
Because any agreement requires you to modify your natural state.
Right.
You have to suppress your organic impulses for the sake of another person's comfort.
Oh, and the moment you begin modifying your core self to maintain a domestic contract, you are losing your existential freedom.
That's his logic, yes.
Okay, so he has completely deconstructed Earth's version of marriage. He has torn it down to the foundation, blaming it for our daily misery, our loss of autonomy, and even global warfare.
He really left no stone unturned in the teardown.
Right, but the deep dive has to pivot here, because a philosophy can't just be a teardown. It has to offer a destination. So what does this all mean? If marriage is the devil's design, what is the divine design? Where do the unmarried go?
Well, Shui Feng does provide a very specific, highly detailed alternative. And what's fascinating is how he initially anchors this alternative in a traditional religious context before taking just a massive conceptual leap.
Yeah, he explicitly quotes Christ Jesus to validate his premise. He points to the scripture where Jesus says, "In heaven there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage."
Right.
Shui Feng uses this to argue that the fundamental reason heaven is beautiful, the reason it actually functions as a paradise, is precisely because the institution of marriage does not exist there.
It is a really clever use of theology. Traditional Christianity often uses marriage as a sacred metaphor, for the relationship between Christ and the church.
Right, the bridegroom and the bride.
Exactly. But Shui Feng weaponizes that specific verse to argue that marriage is inherently an earthly fallen construct.
But he doesn't leave heaven as some abstract, ethereal dimension of clouds and harps, right?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he physicalizes it in a way that blends theology with literal science fiction.
This is the pivot that genuinely surprised me. I mean, we go from analyzing the misery of a nagging partner with bad hygiene to suddenly gazing up at a utopian, marriage-free planet located in the Milky Way galaxy.
It's a staggering expansion of scale. He literally creates a physical heaven located within our cosmos.
He writes that when we look up at the vastness of the cosmos, we find a place in the Milky Way galaxy where people live entirely without marriage. And his description of this place is just incredibly vivid.
Yeah, he paints quite the picture.
He says, everyone in this realm loves and cares for each other, living in absolute harmony and peace. There are beautiful mountains and rivers, abundant natural resources, and no one lacks anything.
Everyone is simply relishing the pure joys of being alive. There's no nagging, no jealousy, no possessiveness, because quite simply, no one owns anyone else.
And he names this realm the 1,000-year world. According to the text, this planet is the primary form of heaven and represents the ultimate direction of human evolutionary development.
It is basically the gold standard of life that Earth's humanity should be striving to emulate.
But let's look at the mechanics of actually reaching this utopia. He seems to be suggesting that you don't need advanced spacecraft or technological breakthroughs to reach the stars.
No spaceships required.
You just need to avoid a marriage license.
Mm-hmm.
How does staying single actually propel you to a physical planet in the Milky Way?
Well, the mechanism he implies is one of spiritual frequency or resonance.
Okay, frequency.
Yeah, by not binding your life, your resources, and your emotions to a single flawed human being, you avoid the heavy, dense energy of jealousy and tribalism we talked about earlier.
Ah, so your spiritual weight remains light. You maintain your original uncorrupted frequency.
Exactly. By avoiding that contract of self-sale, you eventually vibrate at a frequency that naturally matches the 1,000-year world.
Wow. So the final blessing of his text, like the ultimate payoff for the unmarried, is his promise that they will naturally transition into this heavenly realm simply because they didn't tether themselves to the earth through a domestic contract.
It perfectly encapsulates his entire philosophical architecture. The problem is a lack of freedom caused by domestic binding. The solution is the ruthless preservation of absolute personal freedom.
And the reward for that freedom is a physical paradise where human interactions are based on universal, unattached harmony rather than the localized, selfish demands of a nuclear family.
It is a sweeping, radical landscape. I mean, he has taken the most normalized aspect of human society and framed it as a literal cosmic trap.
It really is wild. Just to recap this incredible journey for you listening, we started by examining a philosophical framework that condemns marriage as a devilish trap designed to steal your existential freedom.
We explored the theory that the tribalism incubated in the nuclear family is the actual root cause of global warfare.
Right, and we looked at his incredibly melancholic view of romantic love, where beautiful wishes inevitably erode in the riverbed of years, leading to a bottomless abyss of despair.
And finally, we tracked his solution, which is a marriage-free sci-fi utopia with beautiful mountains and rivers located somewhere in the Milky Way galaxy.
Accessible only to those who refuse to sign a contract of self-sale. And as we stated clearly at the beginning, our mission today was not to pass judgment on whether marriage is a trapdoor or a staircase to happiness.
No, our goal was purely to map out Swething's unique and uncompromising perspective, to understand the logical bridges he builds between a messy bathroom and a cosmic utopia.
It certainly forces you to examine the structural foundations of the societal scripts we just accept as normal. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with something to ponder that pushes back against the core theme of this text.
A little food for thought.
Exactly. The author insists that completely avoiding binding commitments to others is the absolute, singular way to achieve ultimate freedom and reach a heavenly paradise. He equates freedom entirely with a lack of obligation.
Right.
But consider this. Does absolute freedom from binding ties to others actually create a utopia? Or does it risk a profound cosmic loneliness that the author hasn't accounted for?
That is a fascinating counterpoint.
If you are entirely unbound, answering to no one, and tethered to absolutely nothing, are you totally free, or are you just totally adrift? It brings us right back to that question of the societal script. Is the absolute rejection of the script true freedom, or is it just wandering alone in the Milky Way?
Definitely something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the scripts you are handed, and keep exploring different perspectives. We'll catch you next time.